After 12 years of running my father's company, I had finally built it into a $75 million powerhouse. Yet, at a family dinner meant to celebrate that achievement, my father looked at me with a smile and said, "Your brother will take over now." In that instant, my heart sank. But I smiled back. The next morning at work, everything changed. I still remember the way my father had smiled that night, his hand resting proudly on my brother's shoulder, as if the decision had been made long before he spoke the words that would unravel everything I had built. "Your brother will take over now." My stomach dropped, but years of practice had taught me to mask my emotions. I smiled back, as if his words had not pierced straight through me, as if 12 years of my life's work hadn't been dismissed in a single sentence. The dining room buzzed with conversation, glasses clinking, laughter rippling through family and close business associates. It wasn't just a family dinner, it was a celebration. A moment meant to honor what we had built. What I had built. My father had started Harper & Company when I was just a child, a modest logistics business barely keeping its head above water. I grew up watching him struggle, sacrificing nights, vacations, and peace of mind, always chasing one more contract just to stay afloat. When I turned 24, fresh out of business school, he finally allowed me to step in. It wasn't given easily, I had to fight for that chance. And I did more than just step in. I transformed Harper & Company from a struggling regional firm into a national powerhouse, expanding operations, securing million-dollar contracts, and integrating cutting-edge technology. What had once been a near-bankrupt company now stood as an industry leader worth $75 million. And yet, in that moment, none of it mattered. My father had already made up his mind. Ethan would take over, not me. A slow ripple of approval passed around the table, congratulations murmured toward Ethan. I watched him lower his gaze, feigning modesty, though I knew better. Ethan had never truly invested in the business. Over the past decade, he had jumped from one failed venture to another, never staying long enough to build anything, never passionate about logistics, never committed to the company. But he was interested in power. I had spent 12 years proving myself, building Harper & Company from the ground up, making every difficult decision, taking every late-night strategy call, negotiating every crucial contract. Ethan had done none of it. And yet, here we were. I swallowed my emotions. In this family, showing pain was weakness. I had learned that long ago. I reached for my wine glass, steadying my hand before lifting it. "Smile. Lisa, smile." To Ethan, I said, my voice smooth, controlled, perfectly measured. The guests raised their glasses, oblivious to the storm simmering behind my eyes. My mother's gaze found me across the table, her expression unreadable, but I knew she understood. Unlike my father, she had always recognized the years of effort I had poured into the company. But she would not interfere, she never did. And then there was my father, grinning with that same unwavering confidence, completely blind to the force he had unleashed. Ethan met my gaze from across the table, a smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just my father's decision. Ethan had been waiting for this. He had positioned himself carefully, playing the role of the dutiful son who had finally found his calling, and my father, ever the traditionalist, saw no flaw in his logic. A son should inherit the empire. A daughter? A daughter's efforts were always temporary, a footnote in history, no matter how fiercely she fought to prove otherwise. But what they didn't realize, what neither of them had accounted for, was that I had spent 12 years not merely building a company but fortifying my position within it. And tomorrow, they would learn exactly what that meant. That night, sleep eluded me. My mind replayed every sacrifice I had made for Harper & Company, the late nights, the missed birthdays, the relationships that crumbled under the weight of my ambition. I had given everything to this company, and now they expected me to step aside. They had underestimated me. By 3 a.m., I was in my home office. My fingers flew across the keyboard, navigating contracts, executive agreements, and shareholder documents. I knew every corner of this company better than anyone. Ethan believed he was walking into an easy transition, convinced that by next week, his name would be on the office door, his position secured. What he didn't know was that while my father was busy with public appearances, and while Ethan had been busy pretending to learn the business, I had been quietly securing something far more valuable: control. Exactly at 8:45 a.m., I stepped into Harper & Company headquarters. The walls were the same, the polished floors gleaming, the familiar hum of efficiency settling in as employees began their routines. Yet today was different. Today, I wasn't walking into my office, I was walking into a battlefield. The reception area was unusually quiet, the kind of quiet that comes just before a storm. Whispers had already begun. The news of my father's announcement had spread like wildfire. Employees glanced at me with hesitant expressions, avoiding eye contact, unsure where their loyalty should lie. I didn't acknowledge them. I walked with purpose, heels clicking against the marble floors, posture unwavering. Never let them see you shaken. Never let them see the storm you've been planning while they slept. I entered my office, closing the door behind me. I had exactly 15 minutes before my father and Ethan arrived, 15 minutes before they stepped into what they thought would be their new roles as CEO and heir apparent, 15 minutes before everything they had planned crumbled. I sank into my chair, inhaling deeply, then powered on my computer. The screen illuminated a list of confidential documents and contracts, files they had never thought to examine, files they had assumed didn't matter. I navigated to my ownership records, my fingers hovering for a moment before I clicked on the file labeled Executive Shareholders Agreement. I waited, savoring the anticipation. At precisely 9 a.m., a sharp knock sounded at the door. I didn't respond. The door swung open. My father strode in first, exuding authority, the unshakable confidence of a man who had always believed the world owed him obedience. Behind him, Ethan followed, perfectly tailored in a navy suit, every inch the smug heir apparent. My father moved through the room like a king surveying his kingdom. Ethan's grin was triumphant, rehearsed, self-satisfied. It took every ounce of restraint not to laugh. "Lisa," my father said, his voice authoritative, as if acknowledging me were a courtesy. "I assume you're aware of the transition happening today." Transition. Interesting choice of word. "I'm aware," I replied smoothly, leaning back in my chair. I let my gaze settle on Ethan. His smirk only widened. "Good," my father continued, nodding as if we were all in agreement. "Ethan will be stepping in as the new CEO. You'll need to assist him with the handover, get him familiar with operations before you officially move on." I arched an eyebrow. "Move on?" I echoed, feigning confusion. "Dad, I think you're mistaken about something." His face twitched, irritation flickering across his features. He was used to my compliance, to quietly falling in line. He wasn't prepared for this. "Lisa," he said, voice tight, almost patronizing. "This isn't up for debate. We've already made the decision." I smiled, slow and knowing, letting the words sink in before I spoke. "Oh, I know, Dad," I said softly. "The thing is, you don't have the authority to make that decision." Ethan let out a low scoff, crossing his arms, his confidence faltering for the first time. "Lisa, don't make this difficult. We're trying to do this the easy way." I didn't respond. Instead, I reached for the remote on my desk and pressed a button. The large screen on my office wall flickered to life, displaying a document, the same one I had reviewed earlier. Executive Shareholders Agreement. Signed August 17, 2015. Signatories, Lisa Harper, James Harper, Ethan Harper. My father's face paled ever so slightly. I turned to Ethan, my voice cool, deliberate. "Do you even know what this document is?" He crossed his arms, shifting uncomfortably. "A shareholders' agreement," he guessed. I smiled, but there was no humor in it. "Exactly. And according to this agreement, I hold controlling interest in Harper and Company. That means the decision isn't yours to make." It never was. For the first time, I saw doubt flash across both their faces. The smirk was gone from Ethan's lips, replaced by unease. My father's jaw tightened, a storm brewing behind his eyes. I leaned back in my chair, calm, composed, and utterly in control. 12 years of work, 12 years of loyalty and sacrifice, had all led to this moment. And now, for the first time, they were the ones standing in my way. I nodded slowly. "Yes." Then I tapped the screen, highlighting a crucial clause. "Do you know what this says?" I asked, my voice calm but commanding. The room held its breath. This document was drafted during Harper and Company's restructuring. It clearly states that any transfer of executive power, such as appointing a new CEO, requires the approval of all majority shareholders. I met my father's eyes. "And Dad?" "I hold 60% of the company's shares." The silence that followed was suffocating. My father's expression hardened, disbelief etched into every line of his face. That's impossible, Ethan muttered, stepping forward, scanning the screen as if denial could make it disappear. Actually, I said smoothly, it's very possible. You see, while you were busy failing at every startup you touched, and Dad was busy playing the role of business patriarch, I was doing something else. I leaned forward slightly, the weight of 12 years of strategy pressing into my words. I was securing my place. I turned back to my father. Remember 2017, when you needed capital for expansion? You signed over an additional 15% of your shares to me in exchange for my investment. And in 2019, during that legal battle, another 10% was transferred under my name as collateral, which you never reclaimed. That, plus my original 35%, makes me the majority shareholder. My father's jaw clenched, a flicker of recognition passing through his eyes. Ethan, on the other hand, was panicking. You have to be, he began, stammering. I cut him off, reaching into a folder on my desk. This is the most recent legal filing with the state. Want to verify? Ethan snatched the paper, scanning it frantically. With each line, color drained from his face. You can't do this, he whispered. Dad, tell her she can't do this. My father remained silent. He knew. Deep down, he knew I had legally outmaneuvered him. There was nothing he could do. I exhaled slowly, rising from my chair, my heels clicking against the polished floor. I'm not firing you, Ethan, I said, my tone almost gentle. I wouldn't want to force you into the real job market. But you will report to me. You will work under my leadership. I gestured toward the door. Otherwise, you're free to leave. Ethan turned to my father, eyes wide, pleading. But for the first time in his life, my father had no answer. No way to fix this. This wasn't his company anymore. It was mine. The silence in my office was suffocating. Ethan still clutched the legal document, knuckles white from the tight grip. My father stood rigid beside him, his face unreadable, but I knew better. He was calculating, searching for a way out. There wasn't one. I had spent years preparing for this moment, not because I expected betrayal, but because experience had taught me never to assume loyalty when power was involved. For the first time, my father looked at me as if he didn't recognize me. Perhaps he never had. That's it. Ethan finally spoke, his voice laced with bitterness. You're just taking everything. I met his gaze steadily, unflinching. No, Ethan. I'm taking what I earned. What I built. And from now on, you'll remember exactly who runs Harper and Company. I let out a soft, humorless laugh. Taking everything, I repeated, stepping closer to him. Ethan. I built this company from nothing. Every contract, every expansion, every innovation, I made it happen. While you were busy failing upwards, I was keeping this company alive. So no, I'm not taking anything. I leaned in slightly, letting the words sink in. I'm just keeping what's already mine. Ethan's face twisted with anger, but he had no rebuttal. He knew I was right. And worse, so did my father. He had spent years believing bloodline mattered more than ability, that his son would inherit what was rightfully mine. He had underestimated me, and now he was paying the price. Finally, my father broke the silence. His voice was calm, measured, but the strain underneath was unmistakable. You're making a mistake, Lisa. A family should stick together. Do you really want to burn this bridge? I met his gaze head on. Dad, I said slowly, deliberately, you burned this bridge the moment you made your decision without me. His lips pressed into a thin line. Business is bigger than just one person. We can find a solution that works for everyone. I tilted my head slightly, feigning consideration. Oh, I agree. That's why I'm offering both of you a choice. I turned to Ethan first, my voice smooth, professional, cutting through the tension like steel. You can stay in the company, I said, but you won't be CEO. You'll take on an advisory role, with limited authority. Your salary will be generous, but you will answer to me. Ethan stiffened, but I didn't stop. I continued, deliberate and unwavering. Or you can walk away. I'll buy out your shares at market value. You can take the money and find a new project to sink your teeth into. My father scoffed. You're acting like you hold all the cards. I smiled, letting the silence that followed reinforce my words. Let them sit in it. Let them feel what it was like to be powerless. Finally, my father exhaled, shaking his head in disbelief. I never thought you'd do this, he muttered, the sting of it clear in his voice. Not to your own family. A sharp pang struck me at his words. Not to your own family. I wanted to tell him that he had done this, that he had pushed me aside, acted as if I were temporary. But I didn't. It didn't matter. What mattered was that I wasn't going to let them take what I had built. Not now. Not ever. Ethan stormed out first. Good riddance. I knew him well enough to predict his next move. He would go to relatives, family friends, painting himself as the victim of corporate betrayal. I didn't care. I wasn't here to win anyone's approval. I turned back to my father, calm, composed, finally fully in control. Harper & Company had survived struggles, betrayals, and doubt. And now, under my leadership, it would thrive like never before. I was here to win my future. My father lingered for a moment longer, as if waiting for me to change my mind. When I didn't, he gave a slow nod. You've changed, he said quietly. I met his gaze, steady and unflinching. No, Dad. I just finally stopped pretending. Then he left. I exhaled, sinking back into my chair. I should have felt victorious. I had fought for my place, and I had won. But as I stared at the empty doorway, I felt something else too, a quiet, lingering ache. A part of me had always longed for my father's approval, some small, desperate fragment that had hoped if I worked hard enough, if I proved myself over and over again, he would finally see me. The truth was, he had never really looked. And now he had no choice but to see me for what I truly was, not his daughter, not a temporary stand-in, but the rightful leader of Harper & Company. I turned back to my computer, my focus sharpening. I had spent 12 years building this company. Now I would spend the next 12 making it untouchable. My father and brother had tried to take everything from me, but in the end, they were the ones who lost everything. For the first time in 12 years, my office felt empty. No phone calls from my father. No passive-aggressive emails from Ethan. Just silence. But silence did not mean peace. It meant the battle had begun. I knew my father wouldn't walk away quietly, and Ethan, well, he would fight tooth and nail to reclaim what he believed was his birthright. I wasn't naive enough to think this was over. It had only just begun. By the next morning, I could already feel the undercurrent of unease within the company. Employees who had greeted me with confidence the previous week now moved hesitantly, as if afraid to pick a side. A few department heads avoided my gaze altogether, and I knew why. My father and Ethan were at work quietly spinning their whisper network, old family friends, board members, senior executives, planting doubt, portraying me as cold, ruthless and disloyal. Ethan had taken on the role of the wounded son, betrayed by his own sister. I could picture him now in some high-end restaurant, feigning sorrow as he told investors how I had stolen the company from under him. My father needed to say little, just a heavy sigh, a shaking head, the carefully placed words, I only ever wanted the best for my children. It was calculated, dangerous. If they succeeded in turning board members and top executives against me, they could push me out of my own company, or at least make my leadership impossible. I wasn't about to let that happen. That afternoon, I called an emergency executive meeting. As I stepped into the boardroom, I could feel the tension hanging in the air. Half the room avoided my gaze. The other half watched too closely, scrutinizing every movement, waiting for me to slip. I squared my shoulders and walked to the head of the table. The fight for Harper & Company was only beginning, and this time, I was ready for every move. I took my seat at the head of the table, letting my presence fill the room. Let's not waste time, I said, my voice even, commanding attention. I know there have been conversations behind closed doors, over drinks, in hushed voices. I let my eyes scan the room, pausing on each person just long enough to make them shift uncomfortably. I also know that some of you are wondering if my leadership is sustainable. A few people tensed. No one spoke. I tapped my fingers against the polished wood table. Let's clear that up now. I pulled up a presentation on the screen behind me, numbers, data, facts. I built this company from a struggling regional business into a $75 million industry leader. Over the last 5 years, under my leadership, we've seen a 300% increase in revenue and expanded into 6 new markets. I turned to the CFO, Paul. Do we have a single financial indicator suggesting this company is in trouble under my leadership? Paul hesitated, then shook his head. No. In fact, projections show another 20% growth in the next quarter. I nodded. Exactly. So let's be honest about what's really happening here. I leaned forward, locking eyes with the room. My father and brother aren't upset because the company is struggling. They aren't upset because I'm failing as a leader. They're upset because they expected me to step aside and let Ethan take over, regardless of qualifications, regardless of results. The room went silent, tense. Then I dropped the real bomb. I also know that some of you have been contacted in the last 24 hours, offered incentives to push for my resignation. I tilted my head slightly. If anyone here would like to disclose those conversations, now is your chance. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Then, after a long pause, one senior executive cleared his throat. I received a call, he admitted, from your father. He said he was considering making an official appeal to the board. I nodded, unsurprised. And did he offer anything in return for your support? A pause. Then a slow nod. There it is, I said, exhaling sharply as I stood. My father built this company, I began, my voice steady but edged with controlled danger. I won't discredit that. But I took it further than he ever could, and I will not allow him to manipulate it from the outside. I let my voice drop slightly, letting the weight of it settle in. If he wants a fight, he'll get one. I gathered my papers and scanned the room, meeting each executive's gaze. If anyone here believes my father and brother deserve control, now is the time to make your move. Silence. No one moved. Good. I turned and walked out, my head held high. This wasn't just about keeping my company, it was about making sure they never thought they could take it from me again. That night, I made my own call. Not to a board member. Not to an investor. But to the media. By morning, the business section of every major news outlet carried the same headline. Power shift at Harper & Co., Lisa Harper outmaneuvers family in boardroom battle. I had made my move. Now it was their turn, and I was waiting. The morning after my story hit the press, my inbox exploded. Emails, missed calls, messages from journalists, investors, and board members flooded in. Some were supportive. Some were cautious. But almost all of them carried the same underlying question: is it true? I let them wait. I knew the game my father was playing. He had spent decades perfecting the art of public perception, understanding that reputation held weight in business. If he couldn't defeat me in the boardroom, he would undermine me in the public eye, and that was exactly what he was trying to do. By noon, the first counterattack arrived, a press release, neatly crafted, carefully worded, but riddled with subtle insinuations. Harper & Company has always been a family-run business. We are saddened by recent developments, but remain committed to upholding the values that built this company. Changes in leadership are inevitable, and we hope to transition smoothly as we move forward. It was subtle, but I knew exactly what it was saying. Lisa is reckless. Lisa is unstable. Lisa is not a team player. I wasn't surprised. I was, however, furious. I sat in my office, watching industry analysts debate my leadership on the news. Is Lisa Harper too aggressive in her takeover? Will her lack of cooperation hurt the company in the long run? Can she recover from this PR disaster? They spoke as if I weren't watching, as if I wasn't already planning my next move. Because if my father and Ethan wanted a public war, I was going to give them one. I didn't release a statement. I didn't call a press conference. I made one phone call to an old friend in investigative journalism. I have something for you, I said. But you'll need to move fast. An hour later, I sent over documents, emails, financial reports, internal records, evidence that Harper & Company, under my father's leadership, had engaged in questionable business practices over the years. Practices I had spent the last decade quietly fixing. Within 24 hours, the story broke. It was brutal. Behind the scenes at Harper & Company, a legacy of hidden debts, financial cover-ups, and mismanagement. But it also highlighted my leadership, the steady hand that had repaired the damage, restored profitability, and positioned the company for unprecedented growth. The narrative shifted instantly. The board stopped doubting me. Investors stopped hesitating. And my father, he had nowhere to hide. 2 days later, my phone rang. I let it ring 3 times before answering. "Lisa," he said, his voice tight, restrained. "We need to talk." I leaned back, a slow smile crossing my face. The battlefield had changed, and now, for the first time, the conversation was on my terms. I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence stretch between us. Finally, he sighed. "You didn't have to do that." I let out a small, humorless laugh. "Neither did you. This company was supposed to be a legacy," he said quietly. "For the family, for both of you." A familiar pang hit me, a tiny, foolish part of me that had once wanted that too. But not anymore. "Dad," I said softly, "if you wanted me to protect the legacy, you should have trusted me with it. Instead, you tried to take it from me." Another long pause. Then, almost reluctantly, he asked, "What happens now?" I exhaled slowly, letting the weight of 12 years settle. Now I make sure no one can ever touch my company again." The war was over. My father had lost. Ethan had disappeared. And I had won. But as I sat in my office, staring out over the city skyline, there was no satisfaction. No triumph. Just emptiness. 12 years of fighting for Harper & Company, building it, protecting it, making it stronger than ever before, and yet the cost of victory was heavier than I had imagined. Because while I had secured my position, I had lost something else along the way, my family. The next day, I walked into the office as if nothing had changed. But everyone knew the truth. The whispers had stopped. The doubt had faded. I was no longer just Lisa Harper, CEO. I was Lisa Harper, the woman who had outmaneuvered her father and brother and come out on top. Some respected me for it. Some feared me. And some still waited for me to fall. I let them wait. At noon, my father and I met in the conference room for what would be our final discussion. He looked tired, older, as if the weight of everything had finally settled on his shoulders. I waited for him to speak first. When he did, his voice was quieter than I had ever heard it. "I'm retiring," he said simply. Effective immediately. I didn't react. I had expected this. "I'll sell my remaining shares," he continued. "I'll keep a small percentage as an investor, but I won't be involved anymore." I studied him carefully. "And Ethan?" His jaw had tightened. "He's gone," my father admitted. "Took the buyout. He won't be back." A part of me had known it would end this way. Ethan had never been strong enough to fight his own battles. Once it was clear he had lost, he had done what he always did, run. Still, hearing it out loud made something inside me ache, not regret, not guilt, just the finality of it all. I nodded. "Understood." My father exhaled, rubbing his temple as if the tension had left a physical mark. After a long pause, he said something else, his voice heavy, but quieter now, almost reflective. "I never expected it. I underestimated you." It wasn't an apology, not really, but it was the closest thing I would ever get. And strangely, I found that I didn't need it anymore. A month later, Harper & Company looked nothing like it had before. The old board members who had aligned with my father and Ethan were gone. Executives who had questioned my leadership had been replaced. The company had always been strong under my guidance, but now, it was truly mine. With that control came a new vision. I introduced initiatives my father had always rejected, modernized systems he had called unnecessary, and expanded into industries he had been too cautious to explore. Within 6 months, profits soared. Within a year, we had crossed the $100 million mark. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just fighting to prove myself. I was building something that no one could ever take from me again. A year after everything had happened, I met my father for dinner. It was the first time we had spoken since his retirement. He looked different, quieter. He wasn't angry anymore. He was just accepting. "I read about the latest deal you closed," he said over his drink. "It was a smart move." I smirked slightly, allowing the smallest trace of a smile to cross my lips. A ghost of a smile touched his lips too. There was no tension between us anymore. No war left to fight. Only the undeniable truth: he had tried to push me aside, and I had proved him wrong. He lifted his glass. To Harper and Company. I clinked my glass against his. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger or resentment, only peace. I had already won, and I no longer needed his approval to know it. As I sit in my office today, overlooking the city that I helped build into an empire, I reflect on the lessons this journey has taught me. Family can be your biggest enemy. Loyalty is a currency, not a guarantee. Power is never given, it is taken. And sometimes, the best way to prove your worth is to stop seeking validation and build something so strong that they can never ignore it again. I have no regrets. Harper and Company is mine now. And I intend to make sure no one ever forgets it.